And welcome into Husker Hangover. I'm Brandon Shanahan on the Cornhusker Connection Network, live every Sunday on Twitter, and then also on YouTube and Spotify the next day. Another good one, another good week. Vibes are high. Nebraska picks up another win, the second win of the season, back to back. Again, another week where it's just what I needed to see out of Nebraska. Just another good, solid win. Kind of at halftime, things weren't really clicking, but overall, a good win against Louisiana Tech to kind of get them geared up for the rest of the Big Ten campaign, 28-14. Although it kind of felt a little bit, I don't know, it didn't quite feel that close. Of course, going into halftime tied up, total yards. Nebraska had over 419 yards, had over 300 yards on the ground, 6.3 yards per play, 20 first downs. Not very efficient on third down, but overall, you kind of go into one of these games, a lot of times it kind of turned into like a no-win scenario. But when you kind of look at it, I feel good about this, just like how I felt good about Northern Illinois. Now, it's nothing to hang your hat on, of course. It is Northern Illinois and Louisiana Tech. But, I mean, there's a lot of worse ways that this game could have gone. And kind of the big question mark going into it was who was going to play quarterback. Jeff Sims goes down with an ankle. He sits out last week. And then Henrich Haarberg, plays well. It doesn't light the world on fire, but kind of shows that in clearly an offense that had been more simplified than what Jeff Sims was clearly running. Productive. He was very productive. He took care of the football for the most part. Had one fumble that I don't really put on him by any means in that Northern Illinois game. And then a lot of, and this is kind of how it always is with coaches. Not a whole lot of decisiveness as far as who's going to start going forward. Because, of course, Henrich Haarberg played out of the 3 games played at that time. He had the best outing. Granted, he also didn't have to go on the road, didn't have to play a Big Ten defense, didn't have to deal with, all the extracurriculars that come with playing Colorado and Boulder and the whole Coach Prime saga. So he definitely was definitely set up the best to compete against Northern Illinois than Jeff Sims was in his previous 2 starts. But again, played really good, took care of the football. And so kind of coming into this week, I was kind of thinking okay, well, what's the brightest timeline for Nebraska in this season? And seeing how the division had played the first 3 weeks. The best timeline, Nebraska makes the Big Ten championship game. I mean, that is the brightest timeline here. That is not that far off. And so what has to happen between now and then for Nebraska to win the Big Ten West, play for a Big Ten championship? What does that look like? And trust me, I don't know if anybody's had more Jeff Sims slanders than I have, but the brightest timeline is Jeff Sims plays and he's good. He lives up to his potential. He reaches his ceiling. The Jeff Sims brightest timeline is brighter than the Henrich Haarberg's brightest timeline. And that's, I think, pretty obvious based on how the coaches have reacted to this. Never up until Jeff Sims got hurt did they consider making a change. At no point in the offseason was it indicated that it was anything other than Jeff Sims. They brought in Jeff Sims. Casey Thompson left. Logan Smothers left. Richard Torres left. Whole quarterback room left. So there was really no... And the reason is the ceiling. Of course, you don't foresee him playing as poorly as he did, those first 2 games and those incompetent turnovers. But the ceiling's higher, I'm being told. I haven't seen it yet. I saw flashes from it at Georgia Tech when I was studying him before the season. That's the quarterback that is going to lead you to the brightest timeline. Now, I'd also probably say that the darkest timeline may also include Jeff Sims. The timeline where Nebraska doesn't make a bowl game, where they throw out a great defense here the next few weeks, and over the season they just wear down because they're constantly on the field. They're not getting any help from the offense. They're having to eat up extra possessions because of turnovers. And that's the darkest timeline. And again, we haven't seen Henrik Haarberg play a bad game. So I'm not going to say that Jeff Sims' floor is automatically lower. But overall, I think the best case scenario for Nebraska is Jeff Sim is the quarterback, and he's as good as he can be. I think that's a brighter timeline than Henrik Haarberg. Even if he lives up to his potential and reaches his ceiling, I don't think it's as high as Jeff Sims. So going into this game, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for a Jeff Sims get right game. Throw him out there, see what happens. It turns out he wasn't healthy enough, which, that is the right move. If he's not 100% able to go, then yeah, there's no need for him to play, especially because what does make him, I think, the quarterback with the brightest, highest ceiling is that, and especially with the way that the game was called against Louisiana Tech, there wasn't anything that I saw Henrik Haarberg do that I don't think that Jeff Sims could do. Henrik Haarberg was a maniac on the ground. I mean, and he's not really considered that great of an athlete, especially compared to like Jeff Sims. But let's just take a look here. Rushing wise, Henrik Haarberg had 19 carries, 157 yards, 8.3 yards per carry, which is crazy. And then the 170-yard touchdown run. I mean, that's crazy stuff. But there wasn't anything that he did or really created on his own that I don't think that Jeff Sims couldn't have done. It wasn't like he was just making guys miss everywhere and he was so agile and breaking ankles, or that he was so physical, trucking through tackles, breaking tackles. He was a very fine athlete and he did a very fine job. But we also saw Jeff Sims on that long touchdown run against Colorado. Jeff's got wheels too. Jeff can lower the shoulder. Jeff is a big dude. And so it's hard for me to look at that outstanding performance from Haarberg, 157 rushing yards on 19 carries, and think that Jeff Sims couldn't do that. I think at the beginning of the season, you look at Jeff Sims and be like, well, we also don't want him carrying the ball 19 times per game, 20 times per game. But I think that's the formula. I think that's what Nebraska has to do, because I still do think that Jeff Sims is a better thrower, but I think that you have to get him in rhythm. You have to make things easier. It seemed like the offense was very much easier for Henrik Haarberg than it was Jeff Sims. And I'm not even just talking like a versus the defense aspect, but it just looked like Henrik Haarberg didn't have to think out there. He just had to go do one quick 2 reads, get the ball out of your hand. Every now and again, take a deep shot. And I think that Jeff Sims' arm talent opens up a little bit more for that. But overall, I didn't see anything from Haarberg that I don't think Jeff Sims could do. Now, I also saw a lot of things from Jeff Sims in those first 2 games that I didn't see Henrik Haarberg do, and that's, hit defenders in the chest with the football. There was a missed snap, Saturday, so it can't be like, can't drum well, Jeff can't even field the snap these days. Take it anymore. You see, that's the price I get on the Twitter stream, is that you get to see me on. I'm going to cut all these yawns out before putting it on YouTube tomorrow. But Jeff Sims, I think the brightest timeline included him playing, him getting healthy, him having a get right game, get comfortable, Satterfield simpling down the offense like he did for Haarberg. Because here's the thing, man, this defense is legit. This defense is good. And I don't mean like just good against Northern Illinois and Louisiana Tech, but I'm like Big Ten good. Like Iowa's defense is crazy, but there's no reason why this defense can't be the second best in the West. And I think our offense is better than Iowa's. Our offense can be better than Iowa's. Well, I guess it is. They didn't score a single point. Whatever, Penn State, whatever. We'll talk about them this week for sure. Iowa stinks. But overall, but like I said, that didn't happen. Henrik Haarberg did have to go out there. He did play a really good game again. They got the ground game going. I saw some frustration about the lack of success offensively here in the first half, which is true. You go into halftime tied 7-7 with La Tech. That's not great. But then you also look at it like um, the second half, you kind of see the game plan there. While no, the offense wasn't really humming early on in that first half. That's the kind of game plan is that it doesn't have to fire on all cylinders right away because we're going to wear them down. We're going to keep going at them. We're going to keep putting pressure on these guys to fill the gaps with intensity. We're going to keep putting pressure on these guys to stay home and stay on assignment, stay disciplined. And then the second that wall tends to bend, then Nebraska takes off and outscores La Tech. What was it, 21-7 in the final two quarters? Yeah, 21-7. And also the weather delay, I don't think did Nebraska any favors. So, but overall, like I said, I'm really happy. But now with the fact that Jeff Sims didn't get this get right game, Michigan coming to town next week. Like I said, I think the brightest timeline is Jeff Sims is the quarterback. Jeff Sims plays good, and Nebraska makes a Big Ten championship. I think that's the brightest timeline. I think that's the ceiling for Nebraska, and I think that's a fantastic year one for Matt Rule. Also making hay while the sun's out because it's going to be a lot harder to get to the Big Ten championship game here going forward. But you can't play Jeff Sims now. This offense has finally found a rhythm, finally found some identity, finally found some confidence, finally found some momentum. You can't make a shift like that now. Not with Michigan coming to town. And not saying that Nebraska, can contend with Michigan by any means, but this is the kind of formula that this is what Nebraska was gearing for. This is what they're preparing for all offseason was to play like Michigan does, where they're not going to put up 100 points on you. They're not going to throw for 500 yards if they don't have to. But they're going to run it down your throats. They're going to wear you down. They're going to make you stay disciplined. They're going to make you play good football for 60 minutes if you want to hang tight with them. What I've seen from 2 weeks of Jeff Sims and 2 weeks of Henrich Haarberg is Henrich Haarberg has played more good football. He has played a lot less bad football, which I think is the key here. Because if you give Michigan a turnover in the first quarter, 2 turnovers in the first half, they're going to take advantage of that way better than Minnesota or Colorado even could. I mean, they're not going to see that ball again for another 5, 6, 7 minutes. And then by the time that you do, now you're down 2 touchdowns. Now you have to really put pressure on this drive. And then you really do have to score. And, well, if that drive falls short, boom, now it's 3 touchdowns. And that's how these games get out of hand. And neither of these guys are built for a shootout. So I don't know. I don't think that you can make the switch. Again, like I said, I think the brightest timeline is Jeff. I think the ceiling is higher with Jeff. I think that everything that you're looking to do with Haarberg, you can do with Jeff on a higher level. But overall, I just don't see. You can't make a change like that. You start off 0-2 with one guy. He gets hurt. You have to go to QB2. He goes 2-0. How do you disrupt that rhythm? Again, maybe it's not the long-term fit, but for Michigan, you got to play him. You got to play Henrich. But overall, we'll dive in a lot more to that Michigan-Nebraska matchup here later on in the week. I have videos coming out every single day. Another thing that worried me about Nebraska. Another thing that worried me about Nebraska is they still don't have a kicker. Tristan Alvano, yeah, I get it. He's a freshman. He's, 19 years old. He's not supposed to have it dialed in yet. And as we saw from Clemson going to Wall Street to find their kicker, it's not easy to find a kicker in college. And, I feel like we've been very fortunate with kickers like Alex Henry and Brett Maher in the past, but those days are done. But I noticed that when they had the fake field goal, that worked very well drawn up, and was obviously worked. They got the first down, they got the touchdown after that, but you're going to put that on film against Louisiana Tech? This is the time that you pull the rabbit out of the hat. You wouldn't do that if you had a kicker. And then, of course, he misses the field goal before halftime, and it's just, it. I get it. You want to give him an opportunity to kind of be that guy, but you also don't want to get in his head. When he was draining 50 yarders at West Side, he wasn't. He was the man. He was the man. You know, like nothing. Like if all of a sudden you start getting it to him and misses 3 out of 4 and a couple back to back, nerve wracking, especially for a freshman. But I mean, obviously the talent's there, so hopefully it's just it clicks, because it would be really nice to have a kicker again. Because I don't think when people talk about the Scott Frost woes, they properly acknowledge how hard it is to score points when you don't have a kicker. Because then, if you have a competent kicker, you either face 4th and 4 and kick a 45-yard field goal. That's a good spot to be in. You get 3 points, you go home. If you don't have a competent kicker, well, now you got to go for it. Now even a 35-yard field goal, 4th and 2, man, I would love to take the points here, but maybe the points aren't available. So then you go for it, and now you get 0 points out of it. Where if you had a kicker, that's 3 points apiece. Man, I think that matters. That adds up. That builds momentum. That shrinks leads. That's, detrimental, I think so. And again, this guy's not falling with Tristan Albano. He's obviously talented. He's obviously kicked in big moments before, so I think he'll figure it out. But it's like, dang it, like the rest of the team looks so good. It's like, man, if we could just get a kicker. Not like that's the difference between us winning a national championship or anything, but nonetheless, Nebraska wins. I'm happy. I think it was a good win. Michigan's going to be tough. Like I said, we'll get into that here later on this week on Cornish Connection when the boys get back on the scene here. But overall, dive in. One of my favorite segments here: better, worse, same. Kind of getting into it. So obviously, teams and players and coaches that are better than I thought, things that I thought are worse than I thought, and then things that I had, about right. So we'll get into that here up next. So first up on the list is Dan Lanning. Dude's a hater. I mean, there's no other way to put it. You probably tell that from his preseason comments about Colorado not winning anything in the conference. And that's true. I mean, that was a hater comment when it didn't need to be. Those comments did bug me, because I was like, well, you haven't won anything in this conference either. And then Oregon fans, getting after him. Like, Oregon's been a stepping stone job. Chip Kelly left to go take a better job in the NFL. Mario Cristobal took a better job in South Florida, in Miami. Like, Oregon's a stepping stone job. Now, granted, so is Colorado, but it's like you're the same. Although, I mean, I guess you bounce higher up out of Oregon than you do Colorado. But then his comments going into that game, they play for clicks, we play for wins. That's a hater, and that is a hater, and I love it. I think it's exactly what that fan base needed. A little bit of not just getting smoked like that, but also, kind of getting what you've been putting out here over the last couple of weeks. So that was cool to see. Dan Lanning, way better than I thought. Way bigger of a hater than I anticipated. And then, I mean, football wise, they looked that, there's levels to it. There's your top 25 team, and then there's, you're competing for a conference championship. And then there's teams that want to play for national championships. There's teams that want to make the playoff. And Oregon's one of those teams Colorado ran into. They're still a couple of tiers away. But, man, that was, as they've been saying, that was personal. Up next, Ohio State, better than I thought. Yeah, I had a lot of doubts, especially after that first game against Indiana. I didn't know if I could buy into Kyle McCord as QB1 at Ohio State. For the first time, Ryan Day hasn't had a solidified top 12 draft pick quarterback. So what does that do? He's got some questions to answer as far as playing Michigan the last couple of years. So how's that gone? And Notre Dame was a test that I think Notre Dame was very much set up to win that game. And as you see, Marcus Freeman's on this list as well. So we'll talk about their side of that game. But I mean, that's a tough game to win. And that's a tough drive to orchestrate down the road for Kyle McCord. So impressed with him. Overall, Ohio State, yeah, they're good. They're good. I don't think they're as good as they were last year. But I think you can say that about a lot of teams. And I don't think that you need to be as good as Ohio State was last year to make the playoff and even compete for a national championship. So Ohio State, they're definitely still around. They're very much relevant in the CFP race. Up next, Washington State. Cougars, I mean, that's a big win against Oregon State. And they looked so good too. I mean, and I love their uniforms as well. I love the maroon colors. Don't get me wrong, but the gray and the white uniforms I thought were pretty spot on. It looked like they were going into work. And so far, schedule 50-24 win in Fort Collins against Colorado State. That's a good win. 31-22 at home over Wisconsin. That's a good win. 64-21 over Northern Colorado. That's a big win. I mean, there's no chink in the armor there in those three games. And then you play Oregon State, who's coming in hot. Granted, they almost blew it. Don't get me wrong. That's not great. But what was that? 14, 28, 35, 35, 14 at half, or 35, 14 going into the fourth quarter. Cameron Ward, 404 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's a real team. I when I was looking at the Pac-12 this year, doing my my preseason predictions, I kind of chalked up like different tiers for the Pac-12. It seemed very clear cut to me. There was the top tier with USC, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. And then there's the next tier, the tiers who teams that could possibly make the Pac-12 championship if they pull off an upset, one of the above teams get hurt. But I think Washington State might be looking to break out of that second tier. It's also tricky because while I think Washington State, compared to other Pac-12 champions, are right there in the thick of like the previous two Utah teams. That USC team a few years ago was Sam Darnold. I think this Washington State team could absolutely keep up with them, but everyone else in the Pac-12 has also made this huge leap to where, whoever wins the Pac-12, they're knocking on the doorstep of winning a national championship. I mean, you probably go into the Pac-12 championship thinking in the locker room, both of these teams think that they are good enough to win a national championship, and that just hasn't been the case in the Pac-12. So I don't know if Washington State's graduated out of that second tier yet, but I mean, they're looking good. Worse than I thought, Clemson. I've been a big Clemson defender, especially after that Duke game, because you also got to remember, while the score was pretty lopsided in that Duke game, and it was on Monday night, so everybody was watching, they outplayed Duke. They were the better team. They had more yards. They had more first downs. They were better on third down. They were able to pass the ball better. They were able to run the ball better. They had better time of possession. Then you sprinkle in 2 red zone turnovers and a very experienced Duke team. They're going to make you pay for that. But Clemson was leading at halftime. Clemson was within a touchdown going into the fourth quarter. Then, yeah, Duke gets a couple of late touchdowns, blows up the score. But for, that game, first of all, Duke's a good team at home. So losing that game isn't worth to dropping out of the rankings. I think they dropped like 16 spots the next week. And then they beat up on some FCS team and then drop another 4 spots out of the rankings or whatever. And I don't think. And then they play Florida State tight. They have an accountant as a kicker, fresh off of Wall Street. And they play that game pretty close. They lose it in overtime. The first time I think Florida State's beaten Clemson in like 7 years. But there are some true signs of concerns for me. I don't think that they're a bad team. They still might be the third or fourth best team in the ACC after that kind of top tier of like Florida State and North Carolina. It kind of drops off pretty heavy after that, outside of Clemson. As you'll see next on my list, one of those teams who's been disappointing, but overall, they're good, not great. They haven't used the transfer portal as well as even Florida State has. I mean, the receiver who caught the game-winning touchdown pass for Florida, he transferred in from Michigan State. Why didn't Clemson get him? Why didn't Clemson get, one of these 60 guys to come into Colorado? You got to evolve with the times, and I don't think that Dabo Swinney has done that, and I think that's why they're actually in trouble, and that's why they're worse than I thought. Up next, Pittsburgh. Not a whole lot of in-depth football knowledge here as far as analytics, but they've been disappointing. 1-3 to start the year. They beat up on Wolford. Congratulations. They lose to Cincinnati at home. Cincinnati might not be as good of a loss as we may think, and then losing to West Virginia on the road. I guess it is what it is. West Virginia, by the way, beat Texas Tech, so that's maybe a better loss than initially anticipated. But it's losing to North Carolina 41-24 at home. Jerkovic looked very bleak, 11 for 15, 109 yards. And overall, just it didn't even feel that competitive watching it. I mean, I guess they got over 100 rushing yards. So that's pretty cool. But man, when you look at teams who are competing for a conference, it's not just who's the flashiest. Like Florida State, they blew the doors off LSU. That's impressive. It's not just that. It's about how competitive you are in your losses. And I get that they've had 2 back-to-back weeks where they've lost games within, single digits. But man, you got to be a little bit better than that, don't you think? Against North Carolina. And I like North Carolina. I don't think that they're 20 points better than Pittsburgh. How he's going into the season, I didn't think that. But like I said, Pittsburgh is, in fact, worse than I thought. Marcus Freeman, the entire game, I was defending Marcus Freeman and the coaching. I'm like, it's fine. The coaching's fine. This is what good games look like. This is what it looks like when you play good teams. Even if you are as prepared and established and what you're doing is working, sometimes it may not look like that because the other team is pretty good too. And I thought that's what the case was until I heard that on the final 2 plays, Notre Dame only had 10 guys on the field, which that's on the coaches. That's on Marcus Freeman. That's on the defensive coordinator. That's on the defensive line coach. That's on the players out there. You have to coach them to look out for that. Like if you're a linebacker and you think, hey, there's usually somebody in front of me. I know that there's supposed to be somebody in front of me to do something, and there's not. And he went on and said that he absolutely could not accept a penalty by having the guy run on late. The ball was already on the 1-yard line. That's like a foot and a half worth of penalties. So yeah, you don't want to take a penalty there, but you also, and also it's another thing if it's like a safety who may or may not be involved in the play, but Ohio State definitely noticed it. Ohio State definitely saw, hey, they are missing a defensive lineman, and they ran right to it and they scored. And it wasn't like he walked right in it was like, well, he probably would have scored anyways. No, I mean, it was, half a yard quarter of a yard close. Like we're talking like 10 inches maybe. And I don't know, hard to think that an extra defender there wouldn't have played a deal. And like I said, even if you do get called for a penalty and they get an extra crack at it from a foot and a half closer, I mean, you still kind of go into that thing. Well, it's my 11 guys versus your 11 guys. Who can stop who? All you need is a yard. All we need is a stop. Who's going to win? Not, I don't know. It just seems crazy. You can't have that. Just can't have that. Teams that I felt the same about, Kansas State looked like that they were, about the Kansas State team that I had expected them to be going into it. Will Howard still obviously hobbled. He didn't look 100% healthy. But Central Florida, their first conference game as a Big 12 member, not getting a great draw, having to do a 2 Manhattan, but overall, like that's a good team who's looking to make a statement here. They're hungry. They played well. They didn't let Kansas State off the hook for anything. But Kansas State, hung tight. They did exactly what they needed to do. Then as the game went on, they built their lead. I certainly didn't feel like it was a blowout. Anything that Kansas State was miles better um, than Central Florida, but that's what Kansas State does, and I think that's what's preparing them to, ideally make another run at Arlington. We'll see. Mississippi State, real quick. I know that they were on the same tab last week, but I'm going to keep them on here until there's a single game where I miss, right? Because we're a quarter of the way through the season. I'm undefeated, right? And there's, if you look at it, 15 bookmarks waiting to tell me that I'm wrong, 17 comments telling me how wrong I am. I haven't missed yet. And we look at it, Southern Louisiana, all right, whatever. Arizona, whatever. They didn't look good against Arizona, by the way, but they still picked up the win. I called that. They lost against LSU. I called that. They lost to South Carolina. I called that. And like I said here, I'm going to miss a couple of these. I don't think that Mississippi State's that bad to where they don't win a game in conference play. Um, Auburn looks like a winnable game. Kentucky could be a winnable game. Arkansas doesn't look as strong of a, well, it depends on which Arkansas team shows up. Um, but I don't feel like any team other than Southern Mississippi, other than Western Michigan, which they both have as wins for the Bulldogs, by the way. I don't think there's a single team on the schedule that's head and shoulders better than Mississippi State. Again, there's a couple of toss-ups. Arkansas's at home. Auburn's at home. Kentucky, if I had to give them a win today, I'd probably look at Kentucky and Auburn. But even if they beat Arkansas, Auburn, and Kentucky, I'm, 3 games off in a 12-game slate in the SEC, the conference I don't particularly know that well, or at least like on a depth level. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm taking victory laps here, and again, they'll be on here until I miss a single game. I have a feeling they're not going to beat Alabama this week, so I'm gonna keep them on there for next week. I have a good feeling that they're going to beat Western Michigan, and I'll tell you what. Well, if they lose to Western Michigan, then they're probably going to go on the worst then tab. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about halfway through October, and I haven't missed once on Mississippi State. So we'll see. I got my receipts as well, but back to the original project at hand. Um, so far, I've been absolutely right about Mississippi State. But we'll see. We'll see. I think the SEC as a whole, I got to stop looking at the AP rankings. They make me angry. Like, it is what it is. They make me mad. But because Florida barely held on against, was it Colgate or something? Some Charlotte maybe? I don't know. But they didn't cover the spread and they moved up 3 spots. Ridiculous stuff. SEC bias is crazy. I think it's like undefeated teams and then like 1-loss teams are in, and then 3 SEC teams. So let me actually take a look here at the top 25. I don't want reactions. I want just the rankings. Give me a list. Yeah, we'll share this tab instead. Okay, so we're looking at the AP top 25. So undefeated team, undefeated team, undefeated team, undefeated team. There's Notre Dame. One loss SEC team, one loss SEC team, undefeated, undefeated, one loss Oregon State. Okay, so I guess it's not all SEC teams. Then one loss SEC team. Ole Miss hasn't looked great either. Tennessee 3-1. They don't have a quarterback, so it's silly that they're in here. Florida, like I said, they moved up 3 spots. Who was that team that they played? They played Kentucky. They played Charlotte. They beat them 22-7. Couldn't score more than 22 points on Charlotte, and they move up 3 spots. All right. SEC team 4-0, 4-0. Kansas State 57 votes. I think Kansas State's better than Fresno State. I definitely think. Well, it's hard to put Kansas State in there, and then even out here you have Kentucky just waiting for an opportunity. TCU's looked nothing but good since that lost against Colorado. So that's silly to me. Colorado did drop out of the poll, which I didn't quite expect. Kind of talked about they're not one of the 25 best teams in the country, but they've earned it. You know what? I'll say it. I think Colorado absolutely should be ranked ahead of Florida. They deserve it. They have 3 Power 5 wins. 2 Power 5 wins. Okay, let me look at Florida again because I don't. So they lost at home. They beat McNeese. They've beaten 1 Power 5 team. And yeah, their loss isn't as bad, I guess. But what have you done? Not like what have you avoided? Like what have you done? I don't know. Anyway, the SEC is not very good, but they're getting the AP boost, which it is what it is. I don't have any specific cases of SEC slander this year, but Ole Miss is probably another one where it's like, they looked good against Alabama, so we're gonna keep them in the AP poll. I mean, it is what it is. I think I'm just so tired of the SEC bias is all. Anyways, that's all I had for better, worse, the same. Again, we go live Husker Hangover every single Sunday. After Husker games, we'll talk about that. Just a brief reaction to college football. Tomorrow we have an episode of. So on Monday we'll have this on YouTube and Spotify, so you can relive the excitement. Tuesday will be first episode of Cornerstone Connection, and then we'll alternate that. So the Big 12 show will be on Wednesday, and then Cornerstone Connection on Thursday, and then Bookie Brook and the boys winning some money on Friday. Spoiler, we all had a really good week. Not really good, but the best weeks so far. So that'll do it for me here today, but hop on the Cornerstone Connection Network. Lots of great stuff going on. Go Big Red.